Hello, good morning. Good morning from the Euractiv office in Brussels. Welcome to this online conference on the ground reporting. Can it help to combat Russia's disinformation war? Our event is supported by EMIF, the European Media and Information Fund. My name is Georgi Gotev. I will be your moderator this morning. I'm senior editor at Euractiv, and I'm also the publisher of Euractiv Bulgaria. I spent some of my time in my country of origin, Bulgaria. And by the way, I see big differences between Belgium and Bulgaria in the sense that society in Bulgaria is much more vulnerable to Russian propaganda for a variety of reasons. By the way, until recently, most of Bulgarians could watch the first program of Russian TV. I have seen Bulgarian politicians basically repeating the bullet points of the Russian propaganda in the next minutes on other TV channels. Myself, I have some experience with on-the-ground reporting from the time of the Yugoslav wars, and I know that it is true what people say, that at war the first victim is truth. And I think there is a lot of issues to be discussed this morning. When I try to report on Ukraine from a distance, the sentence that I most frequently use is the battlefield reports could not be independently verified. And indeed, I mean, it's extremely difficult for journalists to make sense, for example, regarding statistics, how many deaths there are on one side, how many on the other side, how many tanks have been destroyed, how many airplanes have been downed. On-the-ground reporting these days is possible if you are embedded, but when you are embedded, you are also heavily exposed to one narrative. In any case, we'll discuss these issues and more. With us this morning are Lutz Güllner. He is head of strategic communications at the EU's European External Action Service. Ross Burley, he is co-founder and executive director of the Center for Information Resilience. Yulia Bankova, she is editor-in-chief of the Ukrainian media Liga.net. Katarina Klingova, she is a senior research fellow at the Center for Democracy and Resilience at the think tank Globsec. Paolo Cesarini, he's member of the management committee of the European University Institute and also representing EMIF, the European Media and Information Fund. Unfortunately, MEP Viola von Kramon Taubadel could not be with us this morning due to important votes in the European Parliament. As you know, she is a member of the INGE committee, the special committee on foreign interference in all democratic processes in the EU, including disinformation. Now, our House rules. We will have initial statements. Those will be short, 2 minutes each of the panelists. Basically, in 2 minutes, you can introduce yourself, your organization. Don't go very much further because we hope to have a discussion, a lively discussion with our participants online. And let me explain how this works. Regarding Q&A, you can see right now on the screen a QR code. And thanks to this QR code, you can log to ask questions. And also, if you are logged from the Euractiv events page, you can go to Slido on the right-hand side and ask your questions there, and I will read them on my laptop, on my tablet here. It works. And right, and let me start now with Lutz, Head of Strategic Communications at the European External Action Service. Can you please introduce yourself, perhaps tell us very briefly what EES is doing, perhaps East Stratcom Task Force. Yes, over to you, Lutz.
Thank you, and good morning, Georgi and colleagues. I'm very happy to see on this panel also good friends and close allies. So I'm the head of the strategic communications team in the External Action Service, and we have done a lot of work over the past 5-6 years on the issue of disinformation. And maybe for this debate, I just want to make 2 comments, to kick off this debate. Is we need to be very, very clear about what we are speaking about. Disinformation is a term that encompasses so many different phenomena, from unintentional misinformation, from information confusion, to something that my team is particularly paying attention to, and that is what we call foreign information manipulation. So disinformation used as a strategic tool in a coordinated manner with a very, very clear intention. So this is not a communication challenge. This is more a deliberate way of influencing, of interfering in the information space, in the information environment of another side. And that, of course, has huge impact for us in the European Union, in other parts of the world. And for the sake of brevity, I want to briefly kind of say what are the 4 areas actually that we are putting in the focus of our work. Number 1 is really to understand the issue. So situational awareness, what is happening, who is doing what, how does that impact also on our information space, is I think a very important one. It sounds very technical, but it's still the starting point. Number 2, and that is really the core of the discussion today, is resilience. How can we make our societies, but also our media systems, resilient against these attempts, against these deliberate attempts? Number 3, and I'm very happy to have Paolo Cesarini here also on the panel, because if I can say so, we were a little bit the avant-garde a couple of years ago to think about this, how we can do this, and that is how can we make also important players, so the platforms in the digital space, more transparent, more accountable, and really work with them, but also have clear rules of the game for them in that field. And number 4, we are, of course, then the external service. So we look also at our foreign policy instruments that we have. So for the issue that we have today, the core element is really resilience. How can we strengthen the detection capability, the awareness, the trustworthiness, the access also of independent, of quality journalism? And later in the debate, I would like to give you also a very concrete example in the Western world.
We will come to this. Ross Burley, the floor is yours. Can you present also your organization, the Center for Information Resilience?
Sure thing. Thanks, Georgi. Great to be here. Thanks very much for having us. So yes, the Center for Information Resilience is a UK-based non-profit. We're based in London, but we have staff and projects all around the world. Our biggest project is probably in Myanmar, but we also work extensively in Ukraine and work across all continents trying to combat and counter disinformation. Just over a year ago, at the outset of the war, we teamed up with Bellingcat, the Syria Archive Group, Amnesty, dozens of others, to collate and archive and hash all of the content that was coming out of Ukraine. So on Telegram, on Twitter, on every different platform that you can possibly imagine, even Tinder. All of that archive data will form the heart of any future justice and accountability projects, and we've seen the first step towards that this just recently with the ICC warrant for President Putin. All of that work has evolved into the Eyes of Russia project, which we run at the centre, where we take that archive content and we investigate it, review it, verify it, and then map it so that journalists, policymakers, and colleagues and civil society actors have access to verified, truthful information that they can rely on in what is a sea of disinformation around the conflict. I'll stop there because I know you want to keep it short, but thanks again.
Thank you, Ross. I understand you are in London, right? I think it's good that all of us say where we are. I assume Lutz is in Brussels, just as myself. Yes, and Julia, I think, is in Kiev. But the floor is yours, Julia. Over to you. I cannot hear Julia. Julia, you are muted. Can you unmute yourself? We cannot hear you, Julia. I will ask Julia to unmute herself. In the meantime, I will give the floor to Katarina Klingova. Katarina, you are probably in Prague, I assume, but you will tell us. Over to you.
Thank you, Georgi. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity to be here and share our knowledge. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katarina Klingova. I'm a senior research fellow at GlobeSec. GlobeSec is an international think tank. We're based in Bratislava, Slovakia, so we're really neighboring, right next door to Ukraine. I'm a senior research fellow at the Center for Democracy Resilience. Back in 2015, after the annexation of Crimea, we really saw that from one day to another, certain disinformation actors' websites started to peddle pro-Kremlin propaganda and anti-EU, anti-NATO narratives in Slovakia, but also wider Central Europe. And that's why we started to monitor these activities. And in order to find how widespread these narratives are among the public opinion polls, we started to conduct our own opinion polls to see the impact on the societies. We've been monitoring disinformation in connection with the war in Ukraine. At the end of last year, we also established an office in Kiev. So we have some fellows on the ground that try to foster and find out what are the policies, what are the things that the member states or other international institutions should be providing to the Ukraine. So a brief introduction to what we do. Looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Katarina. And now I know that Julia has solved the microphone problem. Over to you, Julia.
Yes, hello, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, thanks. So good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm in Kiev now, and actually we have air alert for maybe 2 hours. It's still dangerous, I think, all over Ukraine. My name is Yulia Bankova, and I'm editor-in-chief of leading Ukrainian business media. It was founded in 1997, and actually all this time we were focused on business, finance, and political stories and explanations, and was trying to be useful and informative, first of all, to businesses. But as you know, after 24th of February, all the Ukrainian journalists became war correspondent, first of all. So we worked from bomb shelters under missiles attack, even now. Some of my colleagues had to rescue their families from almost occupied villages, and some of them had to be very careful because their relatives remained in occupied territories even now. So this year were very difficult. Some of us joined armed forces, but we faced with many new challenges when martial law which martial law brought us. So now we are learning how to work and keeping quality and to be independent journalists in this reality. I have to say that Ukrainian journalists began to fight disinformation long before the full-scale invasion. So we had a lot of fact-checking projects in Ukraine aimed to specifically debunk this Russian propaganda. And I think that maybe not every, but almost every media had some project connected with Russian myths or propaganda. So I think that we are doing very good in that, and I can confirm that Russian propaganda and disinformation became much lower this year. So we are ready to share this experience with other colleagues abroad. So I think this discussion is very useful. Thank you all for inviting.
Thank you very much, Julia. Very interesting. And now, last but not least, Paolo Cesarini. Over to you, Paolo. Where are you, in Rome, maybe?
No, actually, I'm in Brussels. Good morning, Georgi. Yes, and nice to be here with you and to see also faces of good old friends. Hi, Lutz. So I am Paolo Cesarini. I am in the management board of the European Media and Information Fund, EMIF, which is a philanthropic fund that basically fund projects in 4 different areas: fact-checking, journalistic investigations, research around disinformation, but also sandboxes for a more resilient media ecosystem, and of course, media literacy. We have been in operation for around 1 year and a half, and we have already around 40 projects on our portfolio that are up and running. Pleased to see that out of this number, there are around 10 projects that are focused on Ukraine and the war in Ukraine. These are mainly fact-checking projects, and their focus is about, first of all, building capacity, for instance, by integrating fact-checking into the newsroom of the Ukrainian news agency, or about resilience of building resilience of local media through, by supporting voices of local outlets and by creating networks that can help achieving a higher level of resilience. And of course, a number of projects designed to raise public awareness around the facts surrounding the conflict with a topic-specific or geographic-specific focus. We also have, interestingly, larger projects on sandboxes and research that look at how to integrate, particularly in the Central and Eastern Europe, fact-checking activity into a more organic business model for media. Happy to go through the issues of this debate now in the discussion phase. I will simply flash out for this introductory statement 2 challenges that we are facing, and we are all facing. The first is how to strengthen the media and information activities in such a fragile context. And second, how to ensure, how to enable that professional media reach the intended audience in such a context. I conclude with just one example. The Media and Development Foundation in Ukraine has recently published a study that shows how 46% of independent local news publishers are now restricted in a way or another on Facebook. And that is affecting their monetization, of course, and it seems to be due to the use of certain words like Azov Battalion or Moskali or Orki that are perceived as being words reflecting hate. and therefore entailing a triggering automatic mechanism of downgrading the visibility of this professional media. This is also a problem that often we do not talk about it, but should be addressed. But there are many, many issues I'm happy to discuss during our conversation.
Very interesting. I was myself, for a brief moment, restricted because I said Bulgaria will beat England. That was about football, but it was taught as hate speech, and yeah, I was punished for saying so. But now let's start the real discussion, and I think that we should start with Julia, and the reason is that, as she explained, Ukraine has a tremendous experience, unfortunately, countering Russian disinformation. As she said, this started long before 24 February last year. And I think the resilience we can learn in European countries from the resilience that Ukrainian media have developed in that field. Also, I was pleased to learn that from her that thanks to this resilience, the Russian propaganda appears to be much lower these days. I would like Julia to tell us about the experience of LigaNet, perhaps the experience of other media in Ukraine. Also, tell us what kind of support she would like to receive from our side, perhaps also suggesting what kind of cooperations would be useful with media from across Europe in the context of combating Russia's disinformation war. Now, I'm more generous with your time. I mean, Julia, I will interrupt you if I feel that it is too long, but I will not set up any time frame. I'm just giving you the floor. Over to you.
Thank you. I don't know what start should be. I think that really cooperation between, and that's my aim as editor-in-chief now. I'm trying to establish some connection with European media, and we have an idea, for example, for example, for content exchange. I think it's very important. But I'd like to start with some our experience. Maybe we had a lot of project about the information, and I think that for Ukraine, as I said before, there were many fact-checking projects, and most of this work was done by journalists, especially investigative journalists. But now the role of journalists is to collect and publish facts. So we see that. Unfortunately, Ukraine, it was too late when Ukraine banned this pro-Russian media. We had a lot of Russian propaganda in Ukraine many years until the autumn of last year. But they spread these Russian narratives and propaganda and divided people to many pieces. So when this full-scale invasion became obvious, unfortunately, it was too late. On February 11, I guess, the National Security and Defense Council imposed sanctions against the main pro-Kremlin TV channels. And it was a really great decision. And after that, we feel that people stop talking about that pro-Russian narratives. So in our media, we had many different projects. We discovered pro-Russian Telegram channels, for example, and tell people what connection they are. After that, authorities decided to ban some of them. We told about that. But we faced with also with challenges of banning our media, because as Paolo said, the Facebook and social media became a huge problem when we started covering this war. For example, our post, there were not any hate speech, any Moskali or something like that towards Russians in post of big independent media. But we were banned even for some real photos from Bucha or Irpin or from Kyiv. So Facebook recognized this as violence, and it just blocked our post. We also couldn't promote some of our articles on social media, because when you mention war or Russian war against Ukraine or some atrocities, Russian atrocities, so Facebook also recognized it as violence, and you couldn't promote your article on Facebook or on Instagram. And I think that we had a lot of administrative work, many letters to Facebook that we are independent media, we prove it, and please back us to our page. The same problem had other media with TikTok, for example. I know that really great Ukrainian media was their page was deleted from TikTok, and they started from beginning after millions and millions views on TikTok. So it's a hard daily work, but I think that our authorities established some connections and regular meetings with people who work in big corporations, and we achieved some results. And now, maybe in a few months after the full-scale invasion started, they stopped block us, and they just covered this photo, and you can press the button. I wish to see this photo. They just tell you that you can see some violence on that photo, and it's great. So I think that it's very important to cooperate with Ukrainian for foreign journalists and media to cooperate with Ukrainian journalists. Why? First of all, it's understanding of context. I think this is one of the most important points, because unfortunately, until now, Ukraine is still pursued abroad as part of Soviet space, part of Russia, the same language, the same culture, but it's not the same, definitely. And to understand this context, you need to communicate with Ukrainian journalists, I guess. So the understanding of danger, it's also very important, because from my experience, I see, and from my colleagues who work on the ground a lot and frontline, they confirm that many foreign journalists who came to Ukraine and who worked at a lot of covered many other wars, they underestimate the danger. So at least more than 35, I guess, journalists were killed since February 24th. And unfortunately, and maybe luckily, we already can estimate this danger. So we would like to cooperate more with foreign media. We are open to content exchange. In our media, we launched the English version of our website, and I know that many Ukrainian media also did it after the 24th of February. It's easier now to read about Ukraine from Ukrainian media, but not from those who was sitting in Russia for many years. For example, I can give an example. When last year, a few world leading media launched their local offices in Ukraine, they hired editors from Russia to be the main person for this Ukrainian local. So I think it's maybe not the best decision, because people worked for covered Russia for many years, and now they will have this Moscow perspective in Ukraine, and maybe it's better to hire someone and who will start from very beginning to learn Ukraine. So we
Julia,
are open to
very interesting. I'm shortly interrupting you with a question, by the way, because you mentioned, for example, banning the channels, the Russian propaganda channels, which you said was a great decision, and people stopped churning the Russian narratives immediately after that. And I agree with you that it was a great decision across the EU to ban such channels. But I also find many colleagues here in Europe and in my country of origin who say, no, this is censorship. I would like to hear your take on this.
Yes, we also had such kind of discussions, but we also had proofs that money for this channel, for operating these channels, were not clear. So it was a cash from Russia without any taxes, and it was not just we will ban you only for those you are talking about, but it was a reasonable decision based on facts that people work for Russian money without paying taxes. So that's the story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
It's not a censorship, because they have they can continue on their Facebook or on their YouTube, but to have a big offices in the center of the Kiev and to invite with huge with huge editorial team and pay them very high salaries and share these Russian narratives. So even journalists started to discover and investigate where this money came from. And we understood that it was Russian money without paying taxes and from Russian politicians.
Also, a very brief question. I didn't hear well how many journalists were killed in Ukraine since the start of the war, and perhaps if you can also tell us how many journalists from your media fought as soldiers at the front.
Well, I have the latest statistic I have it from last year. 33 journalists has been killed. It's not only journalists who worked as a journalist in the war, but it's also journalists who joined our forces. So they also were killed. And but 33, at least 33, I think that this number is more now, higher now. From our team, we have 4 persons joined our forces for now. And this week, the force was mobilized.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I now turn to Katarina Klingova to tell us about Globsec? Katarina, you mentioned those opinion polls. I think they are very useful to assess the situation. Maybe if you can take it from there. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Georgi. So we've been conducting annual public opinion polls since 2016. The latest one was actually published last year, and we were able to gather the data at the beginning of the war. So the data was collected at the end of March, beginning of April in Central European countries from, Baltic 3, V4 countries, Bulgaria, Romania. And one thing that we really saw was that with the war, with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, finally, majority of Central Eastern Europeans started to perceive Russia as a security threat. but there were countries as Slovakia, Hungary, but also Romania, Bulgaria, that in many of the questions that we asked appeared to be regional outliers. So despite of the fact that that the war was basically happening next door to Bulgaria, still majority of Bulgarians do not perceive Russia as the security threat, or Hungarians didn't perceive Russia as the security threat for their country. Overall, our public opinion polls show that the years of information operations that are happening in those respective countries, the years where you had own domestic political parties, political actors spreading pro-Kremlin propaganda, something that you mentioned, in the beginning of this debate, do not disappear. Do not disappear with the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And resilience building really takes time. And resilience building is something that, it cannot be the responsibility of media or journalists, but it needs to be whole of society, whole of government approach, which you conduct with the sense that it will take time and that you will need to dedicate significant financial but also personal resources to do that, to achieve it. One thing that we found out also within our public opinion polls is that in many Central and Eastern European countries, there is and there will be a significant part of population, it's from 1/3 to 1/5 of the population, depending on the country, that will believe and that believes pro-Kremlin propaganda. And it's connected to that, long-term information operations, but also it has a lot of historical, cultural drivers that have been there for ages, and that the Kremlin itself, but also pro-Kremlin domestic actors have been actively utilizing. So I think one important thing that needs to be realized by public institutions, public representatives in the European Union, in countries beyond Russia and Ukraine, is that there is a parallel battlefield that is being fought to the one that is being fought in Ukraine, and that's the one that is in our information space. It is important to realize that, yes, we need to be united in our support for Ukraine, supporting them in defending their country, be united in sending them humanitarian and military help. But there are a lot of domestic issues that are being actively utilized by various domestic political actors, domestic pro-Kremlin actors that are igniting polarizations, that are being utilized in order to foster hate against or negative perceptions against Ukrainian refugees, that are equally important to debunk and address, as are the traditional narratives connected with the war in Ukraine that are being spread by the Kremlin propaganda.
Katerina, can I ask you to going a little bit closer to the title of our conference? You mentioned the battlefield in our info space. You mentioned the reasons why some people are vulnerable to Russian propaganda, but we have professional journalists going on the ground in Ukraine to report. The exposure of this reporting, the exposure of the audience to this professional on-the-ground reporting, it probably makes a difference. Is there a way to measure it? You mentioned those opinion polls. Maybe after a certain period of time, you can see that the opinion is shifting, and one of the reasons is precisely this professional on-the-ground reporting. What do you think?
The professional on-the-ground reporting is very, very important. But in Central and Eastern Europe, there have been the decrease in the trust of any kind of institutions, including the media, for years. It has been here for years. And then you have various political actors, various pro-Kremlin domestic actors that have been spreading actually conspiracy theories about journalists, about media themselves, saying that they're the foreign agents, that they're serving or spreading particular propaganda, that they themselves are undermining the democratic processes by the way they eventually report on things, whether it's domestic issues or whether it's the war in Ukraine. Then you need to realize that the media have been, or investigative journalists have been targets of smear attacks from political actors. They have been persuaded. Some of them, have been killed for their actions. Just few weeks ago, we had a 5th anniversary of investigative journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiance being shot at in Slovakia because of his work. So it goes back to the political culture, but it goes back to intensive smear campaigns that have been waged against the journalists themselves. And another factor is something that Paolo mentioned. When we look in our monitoring, is when we compare what kind of messages, narratives resonate in connections to the war in Ukraine, in connections to the refugees, it is the disinformation narratives, it is the negative messaging that is actually getting more traction on social media. It is the pro-Kremlin far extremists in Central and Eastern Europe that are whose videos are getting more viral. So creating the network is important, and fostering the local messages of Ukrainians in our information sphere is very important. But at the same time, we need to clean up and we need to create opportunities for those messages that will actually support the truth and support the verified, fact-checked information to become viral in our information spheres. It's about the algorithms, it's about the sponsored content, it's about something that Yulia mentioned. You have not only mainstream media, investigative journalists being taken down by social media platforms, but in case of Slovakia, it several times happened that it was the police, the account of the Facebook account of Slovak police was taken down because they were pointing out Russian information operation in Slovakia. And this is all based on AI that doesn't understand the domestic information scenes, doesn't understand the nuances. And this is something that needs to be changed. In Slovakia, for example, we have one Facebook fact checker covering 3.5 million, market of Facebook users. And then we have over 1,800 disinformation Facebook pages and open groups that spread conspiracy theories. It's uncomparable. So we need more actions when it comes to social media platforms. We need more transparency. We need algorithms to be actually pushing forward the truth, not polarizing narratives that are getting the tractions, of course, because they're clickbaity. We need to demonetize disinformation, and we need to support investigative journalism in the sense that it's free. Investigative journalism is not. It's expensive, and most of the good content is behind the paywall. And disinformation outlets, RT, Sputnik, one of the things that they're utilized is that their content is free. And in regions as Western Balkans, we see a lot of local outlets taking the content from these pro-Kremlin media machinery because it's for free. And that, it's just amplifying those messages further and further.
Yeah, indeed. And also the language doesn't seem to be a problem in some countries. They take it from Russian easily. I would like to invite Ross Burley to jump in on the same issues from his earlier short presentation. I heard about their experience working with such investigative websites such as Bellingcat. I think some experience, kind of cutting edge experience with algorithms to study social media, perhaps artificial intelligence. I mean, what is our ally in the kind of work we are doing to do our job as journalists in a honest way and not to be overwhelmed by Russian propaganda?
Thanks, Georgi. It's a great question. Look, I mean, I think the first answer is each other. We're only going to kind of get through this and try and beat back a win on the battlefield of the information space, as Katerina so brilliantly put it, if we're all working as one, as policymakers, as journalists, as civil society actors, as open source community. And actually, back in a year ago, that was one of the beautiful things that happened in the midst of all of the evil and aggression, was a sense of everybody coming together. The open source community and the human rights community certainly came together because we knew we were up against the clock to put together a framework which meant that we could capture all of the content that was coming awash coming out of Ukraine and put it into a framework which was applicable to Berkeley protocols, which was able to be used by accountability bodies for future prosecutions. So now there is a bank of over 20,000, a database of 20,000 entries, each of which has been stored and archived and hashed, which investigators can now go through and investigate and verify. And I think what was super interesting at the start of the conflict, and this goes back to kind of the original question of the piece, which is about, reporting from the ground. So do you guys remember when there was a sort of, Russia was trying to concoct various different narratives around trying to get into being attacked themselves, and they staged attacks in the Donbass, and it was really rubbish. Like, they would say that a car had been blown up, and they would blow up a car, and there would be Patrick Lancaster excitedly with his camera filming everything. And then, of course, what they don't realize is that, we as open source investigators, we can take that video, we can take a still image from the video, and we can quite clearly see that the body inside of the car is a cadaver, because it's quite grim and it's quite gruesome, but cadavers have very round bits of the skull taken off, right? Explosions don't cause that. So we're then able to very quickly work with civil society and journalists and policymakers to say, hey, this has clearly been staged, and look, it's quite interesting who is spreading these narratives and spreading this disinformation. It's useful idiots like Patrick who are on the ground reporting, and it all kind of feeds into a wider ecosystem. The other thing I wanted to touch on is about this ecosystem, and again, Katerina raised some really interesting points about RT and such like. The challenge that we have at the moment is a couple of things. One, this idea of kind of Ukraine fatigue, conflict fatigue, which we've seen in every single conflict going back since the 1991 Gulf War, when everything was kind of televised, but audiences do get conflict fatigue. It's a well-known documented study, a phenomena. So how do we try and combat that? So one of the things that the other side are doing, and you can get insights from what the other side are doing, is by varying the types of content that they're putting out. So if you look at RT at the moment, and a good example would be RT Arabic, right? If you were to click on RT Arabic at the moment, there's very little about Ukraine. Yeah, it's mentioned, but a lot of it is about cat videos that have gone viral, and basically anything to bring audiences to their page, to make them click the follow button, which means that they do start ramping up again and start spreading narratives that they want the audiences to see. The audience is already engaged and there. And I think we need to be a little bit smarter about how we present information to audiences who have been divided and have been targeted by disinformation for about 20 years now. about and as Katerina said, who are have been targeted by certain policymakers and certain, shall we say, tech personalities to distrust media, to distrust journalists. And so we are in this dichotomy at the moment of we need to create more engaging content to compete with the disinformation, but at the same time we need to improve and verify and engage with audiences with factually correct information, that, as Katerina says, is expensive and difficult to do on a sort of large scale.
I think, Ross, you are familiar with this Russian narrative. When a Western journalist, like my colleagues in Bellingcat, are using really cutting-edge open source techniques to identify, you gave a very good example with falsification of a bomb attack, or when they use such techniques, they are accused of being journalists in disguise and basically representing MI6 or CIA, or you must be familiar with this kind of narrative. What is your take?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it. I mean, it's a big shout out to my friends from the Grey Zone who are very fond of spreading that kind of garbage. And look, obviously they do it because A, it's clickbaity, and B, it's easy to then they try and distort the very good work and relevant work and important work that Bellingcat and CIR and others do. The fact is, and I don't want to talk for Bellingcat, they're a separate organization, but I'll speak for us. As CIR, when we do a report, whatever it is, when we do our Eyes on Russia map or any report we do, we have methodology, as I'm sure the guys from GlobSec do, and all of our other civil society partners. It's just good standard research practice. You publish your methodology. And it's no secret that open source is not complicated. Like, it's not alchemy. It's just being methodical, and a lot of it is like looking for a needle in a haystack, and it takes a long time. And there is no there's a lot of snake oil, sort of snail salesmen in the business who promise you these glorious AI tools that are going to transform the counter disinformation space, are going to make everything brilliant. It's all rubbish. What makes things hard for the other side is verified information, which is difficult to get because it takes a long time to do it properly to the sort of level that you need to do it. Now, when we did, I'll give you another example. We worked with the guys from CNN on a general that the Russians were using, who was infamous for using sort of carpet bombing techniques in Aleppo and really targeting civilian infrastructure as a tactic on the battlefield. And we were using several examples from Ukraine and cross-referencing them with the tactics used in Aleppo. And we're basically, sort of saying, look, this is a clear pattern of evidence of civilian infrastructure being deliberately targeted, which of course is a war crime. Now, that's one story and one video which CNN released. That one story, I think, took a bunch of investigators 4 months. So that's the challenge that we're up against. And we had to do, it takes that time because, as I say, this stuff can go to the International Criminal Court one day. And so it needs to be absolutely watertight.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Over to you, Paolo. I'm very supportive as a journalist of those who help media to become resilient these days and to acquire tools to fight disinformation. But I think this is a very booming kind of activity where new techniques are also discovered, like artificial intelligence, for example. Are there such projects? Is there some sort of hope that there will be some sort of automatic tools where, I don't know, maybe media will have a label like this content has been checked, perhaps with artificial intelligence, and it's okay, and others, of course, will not have that label. What is your take?
Yes, thank you for this question. And I believe that we need to put together a mix of tools. Let me put this statement a bit in a context. It is clear, and everybody in this panel has reminded us that the Ukraine war, it is not only about, it's not only carried out through shelling and shooting, it is also an information war and is extremely sophisticated. Fact-checking activities have enabled us to gather an important corpus of evidence of various actions taken by the Kremlin to distort the information, influence public opinion. Now, these activities have been relying very much on fact-checking, and fact-checking is not an easy task. It requires, in certain cases, the presence on the ground. So I'll go back to the original theme of this debate. On the ground reporting is important because not all fact-checking activities can be carried out remotely. I'll give you the example. In the mass murder in Bucha and in other cities like Izum, Kupchansk, have been the events that the Kremlin always denied, but alleging that they were staged by the Ukrainians, could be debunked only through the eyes witnessing, by the presence of journalist teams on the spot. So this is a costly activity, requires funding. So the first challenge here, it is about channeling funding to fact-checking activities that are the most needed in order to establish the facts as they unfold. There is also another issue here, and it's an issue of trust in news. You remember, all of you will remember certainly that the first Gulf War has been the first to bring the war, the conflict, the scenes of the conflict into everybody's homes through a 24 hours coverage by TVs like CNN. Now, the Ukrainian war, it seems to me, as the first conflict that has brought under everybody's eyes the atrocities of a conflict via social media. This has enabled, let's say, the production of a vast amount of images, videos, commentaries that have been channeled by ordinary peoples, but also by Russian trolls, very much so, especially in certain channels like TikTok or Telegram, and have competed out professional, serious, on-the-ground reporting. And that has created confusion, has increased the pain and the panic across Ukrainian population, especially during the first days, the first weeks of the war, where people didn't know what to believe. So trust in news, it is a vital role that on-the-ground reporting has to fulfill. And that requires, again, not only money, but also coordination. I think that is where the concept of networks of media outlet comes into play. The support, it is not only about providing weaponry, it is also about, by the West, I mean, it is also about providing means and tools for media outlets to continue to do their work on the ground. And thirdly, there is the issue, as you mentioned, Georgi, of technologies. Certainly, technologies are important. AI can help. Ross was rightly pointing the finger to the fact that this is not a silver bullet. It's not a magic wand that would solve all the problems, and I believe so. Humans need to stay always in the loop, whatever AI system you use, but certainly forensic analysis of images and semantic analysis for text that can help, and I think investment in this area are important. But I would insist very much on the notion of the working together of creating networks. By the way, not long ago in an article on The Guardian, Vice President Jourova has launched an idea like Free Russia radio. Meaning not, of course, creating a new radio, but to put together existing resources from existing outlets in order to provide different voices to Russian audiences. Let's not forget, and I conclude, that Kremlin propaganda aims at three main objectives. One, it is to increase the panic and the pain across the Ukrainian populations. The second is to sow division in the West, across EU and NATO member states, through narratives that, make people believe that the sanctions are not working, that Zelensky is a pro-Nazi ideologist, or that the Ukrainian refugees are rapists, right? But the third one, it is about building consensus domestically, and that it is perhaps what she talked about network.
Paolo, I think you muted yourself, but thank you very much. I would like to continue in the same vein with Lutz. Paolo mentioned this initiative of Vice President Jourova, a radio reminding of what used to be Radio Free Europe before, during the Cold War, and I'm old enough to remember that radio station. He also mentioned that the activities we are kind of trying to imagine are costly. Can you perhaps start by telling us, is the European Commission, the European External Action Service, equipped, including with the necessary funds to conduct such activities, or shall we wait for the next EU budget?
That's a very good question, but Georgi, I think the answer is pretty clear. We are not equipped in the sense of having kind of the big pot of money that we can pour out at the occasion that arises. And maybe that's even good. I mean, not that we have the money, but there is a very, very important question. And that is, of course, who will get this money? With which methodology? What is the aim? Why are we supporting certain and not others? And there are many, many of these questions that a government or government type organization like the European institutions, of course, need to answer. But I will come back to this point, but I just wanted to take up two or three very, very important ideas that came up from the previous speakers. Number one, I think Ross mentioned this, it is so important to have a common understanding of what the problem is. I think you mentioned a methodology. And exactly what you are doing, Ross and Elliot, in Bellingcat, and many of you also here, is maybe one of the key answers, how to approach this issue of information manipulation and disinformation. I'm a little bit concerned about the debate about having good narratives and bad narratives. So a sort of binary element on content, because that is neither, I think, appropriate for governments to make this distinction, what is good, what is bad, what can be said, what cannot be said, nor for social media platforms, nor for anybody else, I think, to determine this. It is really a much more complicated issue of opinions that should be tolerated also in a free society. But where we can draw the line, and that is really my point, is about manipulative techniques that are used. Manipulation, it's very hard to show the intent, but there are ways to identify why people or how people are using specific techniques or tactics or procedures, to manipulate the information. And that can be at the level of the content, can be the content itself, can be supporting documents. You've all seen in your Twitter feed this morning, I guess, about AI-generated pictures of the alleged arrest of Donald Trump, for example. So this manipulation gets easier and easier every day, also because of technological advance. But the manipulation can also be at the level of identities, so that we have networks, that we have amplification networks of people that don't really exist. I mean, there can be troll farms, that can be highly sophisticated networks on social media, but not only on social media, also so-called information portals that have been created in the digital sphere that do as if they were information portals, but they are not. Some of them are even directly related to the Russian security services. And the third level of manipulation that we need to look at is the manipulation of reach, amplification techniques that are simply illegitimate and that have one aim, and Ross illustrated it a little bit with the RT approaches, and that is to get as many audience or an as large audience as possible, and then to switch back into its own either political or propaganda settings. So my point is really, we need to look at the actions, at the behavior of these actors. Of course, in combination with the content, we cannot leave the content alone, but it is important to look at these two things together to determine what is legitimate and what is illegitimate. The Peace Nobel Prize winner that you all know, Maria Ressa, and I think a very, very sharp mind in this field, she has described this very, very nicely when she said, be careful of looking only at the content. The content is the most important. It's like the bullet, it's the projectile. That is what causes the problem, the damage, this is what we see. But still there is a weapon behind. There is an arm, that fires that bullet, and we need to expose that. So for me, this is maybe the one most important element. The second important element, I want to come back to what I think all of you have said about networking, about bringing together, building the alliance, let's say, of actors that have a benign intent there, that have the intent of an enlightened, let's say, activity there, either by fact checkers, by organizations like the CIR, like organizations that go more on plurality, for example. So this networking, I think if I can use the adversaries, have done this very well. There are extremely well-connected networks of disinformation actors. We call it the disinformation ecosystem, and we need to do the same on the other side. And there, I don't want to take out our responsibility as a government actor, but I think it would be wrong to say, oh, please, European Commission or External Action Service, start this activity, put out good messages, put out a lot of information, and that will solve the problem. I think the answer to that is a little bit more complicated, but it will always be in networking. One thing that we have done, just to illustrate also a little bit what I'm saying here, we have a couple of weeks ago in Sarajevo, we brought together a lot of different media professionals, so journalists, bloggers, others that are active in the media scene from the Western Balkans, from Ukraine, from the European Union, from even related to other language areas, whatever, even Chinese-speaking media, to bring them together to discuss this issue, to connect themselves, to share their experience, to know what resources are out there. And I think this is one of the key elements. And to answer your question, Georgi, that is exactly where I think we should invest our money. What Vice President Jourova has in mind is not to create a new single center, that will send the good news to the world, but more of a networked approach. How can we support also the media professionals that actually fled Russia and that have a problem in surviving, at least professionally? How can we support them in the best way? Of course, there are many, many different elements about which pots of money we can use for that. How is this organized? That a lot of member states are doing this already. If I can mention Latvia, if I can mention the Netherlands, for example, that give shelter, support, etc. In the end, it's of course important that they reestablish a business model, that works, because just living from subsidies, I think, is not the way to live in the future. But that is key. And allow me a last point on the sanctions that we imposed on RT. I think we are pretty like-minded here on this panel, but maybe people who listen in have a more, let's say, skeptical view about this. We did not sanction RT because we didn't like what the one or the other journalist was saying. We didn't censor because there was something that we felt was against us. we actually imposed these sanctions for a very simple reason. RT is the arm of the Kremlin. It's an instrument of the Russian security system that they have used to support its illegal action in Ukraine. It is not a media in the sense of all the criteria that we think media should have, about a clear structure, about accountability, about editorial independence. It is controlled, it is financed, it is used as supporting its own strategic objective from the Kremlin. And that's why we have not sanctioned a media, and we have not sanctioned an opinion, but we have sanctioned an instrument of the Kremlin that has been used in this war. And I think to make this point so clear is so important, because sometimes people think there is media freedom is not an important issue in the European Union. It's one of the highest goods that we have, one of the highest values, and that makes it difficult to address this issue. But just to resume, if we focus on the behavior of the actors, of the intent to manipulate, of the activities also, if we can expose them, if we can sharpen awareness for that, and if we have also the necessary regulatory tools in place, I think we can address the issue quite effectively.
Thank you very much, Lutz. I think your words sound also like a conclusion, but I would like to invite also the others to say final words as a conclusion, answering this question from a panelist from Omri Price Alliance from Europe. He asks, how can different actors in the space, media, civil society, governments, platforms, and more, cooperate to disrupt influence operations? Well, the answer by Lutz was networking, building an alliance against disinformation, an ecosystem against disinformation. But I would also like to hear from you, Paolo. What is your take? Final words, keep it short, please.
Yeah, no, very shortly. I would like simply to remind one element that has not been mentioned in our debate, which is the European Media Digital Observatory, the EDMO. That is a concrete example of a structure that should help networking, and has demonstrated exactly during the Ukrainian war its ability to bring together fact-checking organizations from all over Europe, and to make that work more efficient by not only exchanging content, but also experience technologies and work on the ground. It is important to recognize this actor, EDMO, I think that would be my conclusive sentence, because it is not only about carrying out fact-checking activities, it's also about carrying out research, accessing data from the platforms for a better understanding of these mechanisms that Lutz was exactly talking about, and to have a better vision about the anatomy of disinformation. What are the actors, the vectors, what are the techniques, the protocols that are used to spread disinformation? And that it is a good help, and I'm happy to see the progress. Since our pioneers' days a few years ago, progress has been made in the meantime, and EDMO has become an actor in this space.
Katarina, what is your take? How should we, the different actors, cooperate?
Not to repeat what was said by Lutz and what was just said by Paolo, I think it's very important to also understand our own vulnerabilities and do our own vulnerability mapping, in the sense that we have a homework to do, and that homework needs to be done at national but also international level. And if we know where our gaps, where we are weak, where we need to build our own resilience, that is based on the data that just Paolo mentioned, then we can build that network and that cooperation much more stronger. And it is important to, as Lutz mentioned, to realize that we are actually stronger if we cooperate together. And we have a lot of things, a lot of policies, a lot of approaches that we can share between each other and get inspired by each other, that will make our societies individually, but as a whole, much more resilient.
Yes, and Ross Burley, your take?
I think what I would say is two things. I think we need to be a bit more creative, and we need to be a bit more inclusive, widen the net. So I think over the last couple of years we have made some good networks. I could think of a few that have been pretty successful, but I think generally what we're not thinking about is how we appeal to different audiences, to younger audiences. Are we using the right, not only the right channels, but are we using the right formats? And combining, for example, sort of our open source and others' expertise, GlobSec's and others' academic rigor and methodological rigor with, for example, artists, with anime designers, with video content creators, with influencers. All of those different things I think need to be kind of taken into consideration a little bit more. And finally, I would say a key ally in this in terms of networks and creating networks is not Europe, is elsewhere as well. Latin America, East Asia, the Pacific. I'm here in Delhi right now. There are amazing fact-checking organizations. There are amazing open source organizations here, and there are allies who want to help us and can share their expertise. And I think we need to embrace that and try and be more ambitious in the scale of networks and coalitions that we can form.
Dear Julia, I think you probably think that these Westerners are theorizing why we are fighting a war. Our husbands, brothers are on the front, and here we are discussing ideas. Tell us maybe about your feelings.
Yeah, maybe a bit, but yes, I hear it a lot. But I have yes, everything is correct. But I'm afraid that most of European decisions, if we are talking about banning some Russian propaganda, for example, or even weapon, were made too late. So I can ask you to not afraid to make the decision fast, to block Russian propagandists. In Ukraine, we have some very creative Russian journalists who came here to cover war as a Canadian journalist, for example. And we realized this when they are already on the front line. So we also should be creative, I can agree. And we have to make content very attractive and understandable. And it's a good point about young audience. It's very important to engage them. And I think that media literacy is very important strategic decision also. So to teach people how to split facts, propaganda, truth, which media you can read, which you shouldn't. So it's just a few points from me.
Thank you so much, dear Julia. I mean, stay safe. Keep up the good work. Let's be in touch and let us help in any way we can. Thank you, everyone, for this debate. I think personally, I have learned a lot of things, and I think that, of course, the key word remains networking. And the bottom line is that this is how democracy works. Thank you for having joined this Euractiv debate. A good day to you.